to be published in the newsletter. The articles are to be in line in protecting Black people from racism and xenophobia. The I Love Black People movement invited all members and ambassadors. The I Love Black People members. The movement asks all members and ambassadors to contribute to the I Love Black People newsletter by submitting articles to be published in the newsletter. The articles are to be in line with protecting Black people from racism and xenophobia. The I Love Black People movement invited all members and ambassadors to join in the Friday's event, where the community was discussing the South African crisis, Afrophobia, and the xenophobia. Auguste Pandi asked all members and ambassadors to confirm and attend to the Saturday's call in section now. The moderator, Auguste Pandi, asked all spokespersons to prepare and submit weekly reports. This is a brief report submitted by Ambassador Amara Jones. For the COVID-19 update, Sierra Leone has started recording a very high number of cases for the third wave, and this have led to the press release since yesterday that the government has ordered maximum comprehensive of COVID-19 laws in this country. And now they have reinforced the forceful use of face masks in all public places. And there have been a ban put on sporting activities. Public gatherings are not allowed, especially for marriage, funerals, and other public gatherings. Public gatherings are limited to only 50 people. More than that are not allowed. And other measures to contain the virus in Sierra Leone have also been implemented again. Thank you for listening. I am Ambassador Amara Jones, Sierra Leone reporting.
Yes, thank you, Amara Johnson. I am because we are. Up next, we are going to continue with our co-founder, Mr. Christophe Mapondera. Mr. Mapondera, can you hear me?
Yes, okay, I'm just turning in, yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm on. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you are in. It's always a pleasure to meet with you on every Saturday and share some of my ideas and also hear some of your thoughts as well. This weekend has got two major special events, that I would like to, touch upon. The first one is that we pass our condolences to the people of Zambia for the loss of their first president, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, who died this past week. For some of you may not understand the significance of Dr. Kaunda to the total liberation of Africa. Dr. Kaunda, I put him as part of the first generation of, or second generation of Pan-Africanists, people like, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Abdel Nasser of Egypt, Ben Bella of Algeria, and then Agostino Neto, all those were the second generation of Pan-Africanists whose main mission was for the total liberation of Africa. And as Dr. Kwame Nkrumah stated, that unless the whole of Africa is free, Ghana's independence didn't mean much. So Dr. Kaunda is part of that generation that played a pivotal role towards the emancipation of Africa. Whilst Kwame Nkrumah died much earlier after the coup, which was engineered by the British to take him out of power, but Dr. Kaunda Nyerere, Mondlane from Mozambique, Neto, and all that played a very, very strong part to make sure that the rest of Africa was free. I personally am a beneficiary of Dr. Kaunda's benevolence in providing shelter to those of us who had run away from subjugation and brutal terrorization by the colonial powers. Zambia did a lot to support our struggle at the expense of its own people, because the South African forces, the Rhodesian forces, had the capacity to go into Zambia looking for what they termed the terrorists at the time, but of course, for us, they were freedom fighters. And of course, because these were clandestine activities, they were necking. At times they work on the wrong intelligence information. They're told, well, so-and-so is such a place. But because of the collaboration the Zambian security forces had with the freedom fighters, that they were able to provide necessary intelligence, to the freedom fighters, to the freedom parties, that they were able to take necessary action to get out of the way, so that by the time those agents from the South African government or the Rhodesian government got to a place where they suspected that the freedom fighters were hiding, they found out they were not there. So they end up killing or injuring people who had nothing to do with what they were looking for. So these were sacrifices that the Zambian people endured for the cause of the liberation of the rest of us. But this only came as a result of Dr. Kaunda's leadership and making his people understand, that the sacrifices that they were making were necessary because the liberation of the rest of Africa could not be attained unless Zambia played the role it did. Zambia being one of the frontline states, as they were called, and these frontline states referred to countries that were bordering, countries that were still under colonial rule. And again, this was, countries like Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, the DRC, and so those countries were very much, subjected, to attacks by the colonizers. But we are also very grateful, in the sense that besides getting the shelter from the Zambian government, but they also provided, a basis for our freedom fighters for training camps, staging camps, and all that, that was necessary in the execution of the liberation struggle. And then President Kaunda also played a very much a significant role in the negotiations that ended up in the release of Nelson Mandela from prison, and even in the Zimbabwean context, the British government, the Americans, and all that. I mean, they would always be consulting Kaunda to say, hey, this is what we want to do, what do you think, and so forth. And the Kaunda provided the necessary positions that did not compromise our freedom in any way. And the British, and the Americans took heed of what President Kaunda said, or his opinions, because he was so pivotal to the struggle itself. And so his death the significance that it has now, is that if you look at from 1905 coming all the way to 2021, you find that there are stages, for political leaders, who have come up. Many of them, they also started as young people, just the way most of you are, just to show, that to make political and significant change in a political system, or to affect, change for that, that benefits your own people. It's not something that you've got to leave to the elders or leave to the, so-called, older people and so forth. Many of these changes were initiated by young people. When Kaunda and Kwame Nkrumah and Nyerere, when they started the whole fight for the emancipation, for Africa, they were young people. Some of them, they were still, they started these things when they were still in the university, and played, a role, in formulating, how their struggles at that time, were strategized. And then today, I'd say, as young people, you now have a different struggle to deal with. You've got different issues that you have to deal with. Whilst many of you did not experience what living under colonialism felt like, but now we've got a different type of neocolonialism that is building up in Africa, for the simple reason that, one, Africa still has the major resources, natural resources of any continent in the world. So there's a new scramble for Africa. The Chinese, the British, whoever, the Americans, and so forth. They all want to have access to those resources, and they are using all kinds of tactics and ways and means to have access to it. Some involving bribing some of our leaders, they're eliminating some of our leaders, and so because if we don't understand exactly the value of what we have, that's why you find that maybe some of our countries are getting into all these crazy agreements that ends up more or less surrendering our countries to those for foreign powers. Whereas, for the young generation, you understand the legal systems much better. You understand, the best way in which some of these, agreements can be put in place, which have to be put in place, taking into account that these are resources that are going to affect you, your generation, and the generations to come, and so forth. So if we are careless about how we are distributing or having our resources exploited, 2-3 generations from now, you may find that 2 things will have happened to Africa. There'll be new colonization of Africa, which resulted in us allowing the exploitation of our resources, of which at the end of the day, you have a large influx of people coming from outside at the expense of our own people, getting to understand what these resources are and how they can benefit us. So it makes me appeal to each and every one of you that, first of all, really understand what are the resources that you have in your country and how best you can utilize them, how you can continue to have full control and possession of your resources. Then the next thing that I want to touch on briefly is the significance of what's called Juneteenth. That was the day, June 19th, at which the last slaves in America were freed. Whilst that is a significant, well, the most significant thing, as far as I'm concerned, is the recognition by the U.S. government, that June 19th was a very significant day for the plight of the black man in America. But right now, you notice that there are still other sections of America that don't want to recognize that the black people are a free people, and they still subject them to all kinds of ruthless, treatment. Right now, there's a very strong movement to try and disenfranchise black people from voting. So basically, what they're saying that, look, we don't recognize that you were freed as as slaves, and that you're entitled to have all the rights and privileges of any American citizen, of which voting is the biggest right one has, which means you can choose your own leaders. But because having a vote by black people is becoming a political threat to the main majority group in the U.S. So you find that there's a lot of effort being made to make it very difficult for black people to vote. So whilst I personally welcome, the establishment of June 19th as a public holiday, in the U.S., but I think it needs to be followed up by making it easy for black people to vote and participate in the American political system. I think those are the two things that I have today, and I want to leave room for any comments or questions people may have. Okay, Yvonne, I'm finished. If people have any questions or comments, I'll be glad to answer.
Yes, someone is asking, what do you think that the youth can play within the role of Pan-Africanism within the current time and in the future?
Right. I think the significant thing the youth can is that you have to start thinking in a much broader base, that rather than look at just your own little country. Say, oh, I'm just Zimbabwean, but they've got to look into every black man wherever they are. They are your brothers, they are your sisters. So we have to start reducing the significance of the boundaries that we have used to define us. Those boundaries were made for the convenience of those who were colonizing us. But right now, as youth, many of you, I don't think you think exactly the way your parents or those before them, strictly in the context of the colonial boundaries. Right now, I think you've got to start thinking, that every part of Africa is your home. Whatever you do, you must be able to think in those broader terms. You've got so many tools now, of communicating with other young youth, from any part of Africa, through Facebook, through WhatsApp, or through social media. You've got much more exposure to youth in other parts. So if you can, get to exchange views and communicate with them, I think that once we get that integration, that will redefine Pan-Africanism. As I mentioned the last time, that each one of us, each generation defines what Pan-Africanism is. The way Du Bois and Marcus Garvey were looking at Pan-Africanism, and even when Kaunda and Nkrumah and Nyerere were looking at Pan-Africanism, it was in a whole different context than what you guys have to look at Pan-Africanism at. You now have different tools of better communication. Our economies in Africa as a whole, they're all intertwined. That is why the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is trying to start consolidating the African people together. Like having open borders, open skies, free trade, trade of movement of goods and services, in between states and so forth. So all those kinds of activities begin to chip away. But at the end of the day, it's really how you communicate with other young people, whether they're in South Africa, in Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, and so forth. Okay, anybody else?
Yes, there is another question. How do we deal with xenophobia, a very troubling action in African liberation?
Well, again, it's all tied up to communication. The people who conduct xenophobia in their countries, they do not understand how they are related to other people, other Africans from different parts of the continent. Again, they are still tied up to those colonial boundaries. You've got countries in Africa where the colonial boundaries just cut across a family, where all overnight you've got your uncle, your mother's brother is in Malawi, and the rest of your family was left in Zambia. Or the same thing can happen, like between Mozambique and Zimbabwe, where in our eastern border you've got families that were just cut in between. So how do you define xenophobia in that context? Which means maybe the people who are in the interior of the country who don't understand the relationship between their country and the surrounding countries think, well, I am South African, so I don't want any other strangers. But even with South Africa itself, in northern South Africa, I've got the group called the Venda people. Part of their clan is in Zimbabwe, and the other part is in Zimbabwe. So do you tell your uncle who is in Zimbabwe and say, okay, yeah, I don't want you in South Africa, you're a stranger? And then, it just doesn't make any sense, So I think the only way to, again, get over that is communication, make use of the social media that you have. And I think probably that's one of the challenges, that you have, if you can come up with a way of effectively communicating beyond these boundaries to the rest of your colleagues, then I think that you begin to break down this xenophobia. This thing that we have here with the I Love Black People. When I look at the screen here, I've got people from Zambia, from Namibia, from Ghana, Cameroon, and so forth. You guys have become the nucleus of what the rest of Africa should be looking like. You have become the nucleus of how the rest of Africa should be communicating and interacting. Okay, anybody else?
Yes, there is another question, like how African youth should do against colonialist parliament's proposal into African Union.
Again, you have to participate. Don't leave it up to other people to become politicians. Don't leave it up to the other people. If you have a good idea, I'll give you an example of young people who have taken a role. Julius Malema in South Africa. Okay, he's a young guy. When he could not get along with the older generation that was stuck in their own ways, he formed the EFF. And when they started off, they kind of didn't think he was going to go anywhere. But he was able to mobilize as many young South Africans, but he also had a message that appealed to the rest of South Africans. That's why today you find that he has become the major opposition party in South Africa. The same thing can happen in any part of Africa. It's really, you have to be involved. Don't look up to somebody else to do it. I know getting involved in politics can be risky. Some, if you are a scared person, say, no, I can't do that. I'm gonna, I'll be killed or whatever and so forth. But there are so many other examples of young, people. You've got this young man, I can't remember his name, in Uganda. When he started off, people kind of wrote him off, but he had the message of which people resonated with. And you find that he became, a big threat to the political establishment, but his message came across. And right now, I'm sure whatever President Museveni does in Uganda is now taking into account, the wishes of the young people as represented, by the young, guy who joined politics and gave him a big, threat to his political survival. Anybody else?
Yes, the last question is from Kayihura Albio from Rwanda. He's asking, since every generation has its own problems, now ours is neocolonialism and poverty around the continent. So how can we eradicate those two things in this challenging situation of COVID-19?
Well, first of all, is to deal with the COVID-19 itself, of which there's so much that we can do ourselves, like washing hands, masking up. You don't need to have the commercial mask, made in China or wherever, you can take a handkerchief, social distancing, and so forth. These are things that you can do to minimize the spread of the virus. Excuse me. But the second thing, as I mentioned earlier, you have to understand what is the economic base of your country. What is it that you can play? Don't leave it up to other people to come and do it for you. Business is all about looking at the problems that your country is facing and looking for solutions for it. Okay. At times we have got this illusion, that the only investment we can look at is what it comes out from, from overseas, from white people, whatever. There's a lot of investment that we can make ourselves. Some of it does not necessarily have to be monetary. You can even invest your labor. Working, within your village or even within your family, that you can start your small garden. You become self-sufficient, in your food security and so forth. Then you progress from that stage to other levels. But the thing that we cannot continue to blame neocolonialism without taking responsibility for our own development as well. Okay, when we believe that neocolonialism is hindering our progress, we are giving an excuse to somebody else to say, okay, I can't do it because there's a colonial guy, somewhere, who is forcing me not to do this and so forth. But it is up to you to get things in your own hands, or take things into your own hands. Okay, anybody else? And that the Ebenezer Oti, does he have a question?
Yes, I think that's all for today.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Mukondera, for your time.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, you all have a good week, and we meet next weekend.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Up next, we have Nana Akua. Can you hear me?
Yes, I just unmuted myself. Greetings, everyone. Thank you all for joining us again today. I hope that everyone has received their packet and have been able to review it. If not, I will share the screen. If Madam Host, you will allow that, I will pull the information up on the screen, but I see a couple people popped on and are showing me their faces. Yay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Hello, greetings to you.
Yes,
I love seeing our, okay, thank you. I love seeing our beautiful Black people. So we are, sorry, let me turn my phone off. So we are in the second week of this 4-week revised schedule for the Pan-African Healthcare course. And today we are talking about herbs, essential oils, homeopathic remedies. Let's see what else I had to fit in here, and superfoods. So it's a lot of information. You'll have to refer to the text because I will not have time to go over everything. But as always, the purpose is to introduce you to it, give you the resources so that you can refer back, you know, at a later time. So you will have this information. Some things you may not be able to access depending on where you are on the continent or here in the Americas or wherever you may be in the world. But if you're able to access it by ordering it from Amazon or some other carriers that do ship internationally, or as I've always stated, and especially since we're talking about herbs, I always highly recommend going to the local Eolorisha or Akomfo or Basumfo or Dentiny or Sangoma, Vodun priest, or any of the traditionalists who work with herbs in your areas. Your traditional healers who practice indigenous traditional African religions will always have the knowledge and access to local herbs that will heal the body. So this information will predominantly be more so Western herbs, but hopefully there'll be some that you are familiar with. And then of course, those of us who are here in the States, you can certainly easily access this. But again, it's all about knowledge and knowing that there are herbs that pretty much address every issue, any health concern, any health complaint or ailment that exists. God is just awesome like that. And these natural trees and plants and shrubs and flowers, they are for our healing. They are for our consumption and for our mind, body, and spirit healing. And let me also say, I cannot post every day in our WhatsApp group. However, what I have committed to doing is about every other day, I will post mainly handouts because I'm sending usually some days if I have time on Saturdays, but usually on Sundays or Mondays at the latest, I usually will send the packet for the upcoming week. So you have a lot of materials to go over. You can always separate them out into, you know, a page or two a day. But in addition, I'll also send out some other handouts that'll be sort of just quick visuals that you can reference that will be about the topic from the previous day, okay? Am I sharing my screen? Oh, no, this is somebody else's screen. Hold on. I do intend to share my screen, but it looks like maybe someone else's screen is up right now. Let's see.
You can share your screen now.
Okay, I think you had to disable it for the other person, but now I got it. Okay. So yes, I will share maybe every other day. So 2 or 3 times a week, in addition to the packet for the class itself, there will be additional handouts. So if you were able to log in throughout this week, you saw a handout on some minerals and some of the natural sources of minerals and proteins. I think I listed or posted a couple of handouts about sources of protein and I think iron. And I have a lot on different vitamins and minerals and natural food sources for those. So I may continue adding some of those for next week, but then I'll add some others for herbs and things like that. for this upcoming week. So remember to go to our WhatsApp group and get your lessons each week, and then additional reading materials and handouts to review on the topic that we discussed. So today we're talking about herbs. So this is sort of a handout, just giving an overview. These are predominantly Western herbs, as we would say. However, there are some included in here, that one or two that are maybe found on the continent of Africa, some that are Chinese herbs, probably predominantly what we will say as Native American or indigenous herbs here to North America. I want to highlight a few that I think are super herbs. They definitely have called certain foods superfoods. I don't know that there's such a term, but I'm making it up. But these are some of the herbs I would consider super herbs. These are herbs that I think are so valuable because they naturally contain a lot of vitamins and minerals, or they have so many vast uses that I think is good to have on hand. And so this first one that I'm going to mention is alfalfa. So if you see there, alfalfa is highly, extremely nutritive. It has chlorophyll, which is what gives us our minerals in our green leafy vegetables. So it's what makes plants green and makes them full of different minerals. It also has pretty much every vitamin in it, such as vitamin K and others. It's a source of protein. So it's highly nutritive herbs, has a lot of nutrition. And it's used for arthritis, bleeding disorders, menopause, overall vitality, improving your energy and stamina and things of that nature. So alfalfa is one of those that I would like to highlight here. Another one that I would like to drop down to, and it doesn't specify which minerals, but catnip. Catnip is another really highly nutritive herb, has pretty much every vitamin and mineral in it as well. Here in the States, those of us who keep domestic cats, we usually give it to our cats because it kind of helps make them happy, and they kind of run around and they're in this euphoric state, right? But for humans, it's great for diarrhea, flatulence, colic. It's a good sedative. It's good for nervous and emotional tension. So catnip is, I think, a really highly underrated herb that I do want to point out. Another one that I think is great. What's the page? Okay, it's coming in. Okay, another one that I think is really highly nutritive is red raspberry. And is it on this page? Yes, here it is. So red raspberry, another one that has a lot of vitamins and minerals in it, so it's good as a tonic herb. Most often, though, is used for women because it's great for preparing the body for pregnancy, strengthening the reproductive system, relieves nausea. It's great for preventing premature labor and miscarriage, and it also improves milk production. So if you know anyone who is looking to bear a child or is nursing and having problems bringing the milk down, this is really a high nutritive herb, but also will help with all things related to the female reproductive system and pregnancy, nursing, and all of that. Those three I wanted to highlight for that. Well, actually, let me go back up to nettle. Nettle is very high in a lot of minerals. It's a green herb, has a lot of chlorophyll in it as well, but really good for iron. If you're low in iron or have anemia, and even calcium. It's also rich in calcium, silicea or silica, as well as potassium. This is another one that's really high in nutrients. Nettle is good for food and environmental allergies. It's good to use in hair products, so it helps with baldness and dandruff. Good for allergies, sinuses, hay fever, any and all things related to your bronchial system, your lungs, and any impact that the environment can have on it. along the left side, not left side, right side of this same page, you'll see they list common health issues and which herbs are good for that. I will not go into that, but this will give you some herbs that are good for blood pressure, for colds and infections, for headaches, for insomnia, for indigestion, for liver problems, and things of that nature. I want to get down to sort of me suggesting the herbs that I think are great to have in your medicine chest. So I am going to go over herbs, but let me just get through these couple of handouts as they're listed here. This handout is about safety of herbs. This is good to have on hand. Most times there are contraindications with herbs, especially if you are using prescription medications. So this is when you would kind of take note. And there's even a book you can reference that gives the drug and herb interactions. And I've referenced this before, and I haven't brought it over from my office. And I can't bring it to memory, but if you Google, there's even a book that you can reference to see if there is a interaction between what herbs you may want to take and what prescriptions you may be on. I like this handout because it gives you indication of how different herbs should be taken. So it gives you this formula. I can scroll down, right? So here near the bottom of the page, you'll see if you are taking herbs in, say, capsule form, it gives you sort of the typical dosage. So, and generally the standard dosage is what we call a double O or double lock capsule. They come in different sizes. But most encapsulated herbs, they'll be that standard double O size. This is giving you indication of what a child's dosage would be, because most herbs will come in the form of telling you, oh, take 2 capsules 3 times a day. For children's dosing, you can follow this chart here that gives you the ages and how much of that standard adult dose to take. So for a child that's 10 to 14, for example, you would take half the dosage. For a child 6 to 10, a third of that. 2 to 6, a fourth of that, and so on, right? But we know this can go between capsules or if it's something in liquid form. And usually, of course, for children and especially infants, you're using those dropper or those syringe or those infant cups that you're administering like a tea, a cool down tea of herbs. Of course, for certain ages, you're not giving capsules and such anyway. Okay, so this is the page I wanted to go over in a little bit of detail. So this is a handout that I created or compiled, I should say, many years ago. And this sort of gives you an idea of, what herbs you should maybe highlight, which herbs you should try to include. Herbal medicine is defined as the medicinal use of herb plants and trees to regain and or maintain health. Herbs are used to cleanse, detoxify, build or rebuild, and tone in order to bring the body back into balance. Mother Nature should be appreciated not only for her beauty, but also for her valuable resource of wild foods and medicines. These wonderful cures from the earth are often neglected and underrated. One should always attempt to heal themselves naturally before even considering unnatural or artificial means. There are herbal cures for nearly every disease or dis-ease or illness known to man. Here I will provide a list of herbs that every household should contain. We should have herbs such as valerian and ginger on hand, just as we do aspirin and Alka-Seltzer. Better yet, we should have herbs and natural supplements instead of these man-made items. They should really be replaced altogether. This writing will help you start to make that transition. So below are some common, easy to find and make herbals to have on hand for common everyday health complaints, okay? And so ginger is definitely one. We know that ginger is great for the colon, And we know that ginger is found in Africa, so definitely you can find that everywhere. I teach a traditional herbalism class where we talk about all the different areas on the planet that herbs originate. And so of course, ginger is one of those that's found across the board. So whether you're talking about Native American herbs or Western herbs here in the US, or whether you're talking about African herbs, if you're talking about Chinese herbs, if you're talking about Ayurvedic or herbs found in India, ginger is one of those that you can find everywhere. Highly recommended. Stimulates circulation. It's good for killing off different different disease-causing microbes, such as parasites, bacteria, viruses, things of that nature. It helps heal sores and wounds. It's good for bowel disorders, fever, hot flashes, indigestion, morning sickness, nausea, vomiting, you name it. We also know it's good for inflamed tissue or joints. So if you are in pain due to arthritis, this is excellent for that. It also is good for fevers. So if you have a fever, soaking your body or even just your feet in ginger is really excellent. You would make a strong tea with the root, or if you have the essential oil of ginger, adding that to your bath water or your foot bath water, this can help reduce fever. Valerian is another one. This improves circulation, acts as a sedative. It's good for anxiety, high blood pressure, insomnia, menstrual cramps, muscle cramps, nervousness, you name it. Cayenne is another one. This aids in digestion, improves circulation, helps stop bleeding from ulcers. It is good for your heart, kidneys, lungs, pancreas, spleen, stomach. Cayenne is excellent because it's considered a carrier herb, so it makes other herbs even work better, okay? So usually it will be added into a formula as a stimulant, as a carrier to improve the effectiveness of those other herbs in that combination. Good for colds, sinuses, sore throats. Garlic, also found. Cayenne and garlic are also easily found pretty much everywhere. So garlic detoxifies the body, builds the immune function, lowers blood pressure, improves circulation, good for colds, flu, yeast infections, sinuses, ulcers, an array of diseases and infections. Cholesterol, high blood pressure. Another one is rosemary. Rosemary helps fight bacteria. It relaxes the stomach. It stimulates circulation and digestion. Good for headaches, mental clarity. It's good for high and low blood pressure, circulatory problems. Rosemary also is good for like spiritual baths, so it kind of heightens your awareness spiritually and mentally. So that I think is another underrated herb and has multiple uses. Charcoal, not technically an herb, but definitely something you should have in your medicine chest. Charcoal removes toxic substances from the colon and bloodstream. This is what they give you if you go to a hospital and you've had food poisoning or you've overdosed on something and they're trying to isolate and release the toxins from your system. So you can take this, and it is an over-the-counter that you can get either in powder or in capsule or tablet form. So it's used for gas, upset stomach, food poisoning, diarrhea, things of that nature. Aloe vera, another one. Actually, so I said that some of these may not be easily found, but actually a lot of these you can easily access. Aloe vera, this is applied topically, as we know, for burns, for wounds, sunburn, things of that nature. However, internally, it's also a great antifungal, antibacterial, antiviral. So it soothes the stomach, so it helps with that whole gastrointestinal tract. Acts as a mild laxative, aids in healing the stomach and the colon. It's good for AIDS and for skin and digestive disorders. The juice or the gel of the plant is what's used. Elder or elderberries or the berries of the elder tree, they build the blood, cleanse the system, ease constipation, enhances immune function, good for inflammation, increases perspiration, among other things, stimulates circulation. So elderberry, very popular these days with the COVID-19 pandemic. but has a lot of other good uses as well. Peppermint enhances digestion by increasing stomach acidity. So it helps kind of increase or speed up the digestive process. So this is a good after dinner tea, maybe about 30, 40 minutes after you've eaten. But it's good for chills, colic, diarrhea, headache, heart trouble, indigestion, nausea, and so on. Echinacea and golden seal, I'm combining these together even though these are two different herbs. So they work very well though together and they do complement each other. However, you can use them separate and apart. Echinacea, for example, is a good anti-inflammatory and antiviral. It's good for the immune system and the lymphatic system. It's good for infections, good for snake bites. It increases the white blood cells in the body. So it helps you heal wounds and sores and insect bites and cuts and scrapes faster. Golden seal acts as an antibiotic. It cleanses the body, increases the effectiveness of insulin, strengthens the immune system, helps pretty much every organ work better. The colon, the liver, the pancreas, spleen, the lymphatic and respiratory systems, helps with excess mucus in the body, improves digestion, inflammation, a number of things. So you should definitely get to know both of these, echinacea and golden seal. Lavender is the next one, used for relieving stress and depression, but it's also good for the skin. It's good for burns, headaches, psoriasis, and other skin problems. So you can drink it in tea, but you can also make it in skin products. Skullcap aids in sleep, improving circulation, strengthens the heart muscle, good for anxiety, fatigue, headache, hyperactivity, nervous disorders, menstrual muscle cramps, spasms, stress, all of these types of things. Nettle, I mentioned nettle a second ago, highly nutritive herb. It's an expectorant, pain reliever, tonic, high in minerals we've discussed before. Cranesbill is not as popular. Cranesbill is in the geranium family. So sometimes it's hard to find, but you would have to kind of know its origin, but it's in the geranium family, also referred to as wild alum. But this is an astringent herb. It affects the stomach, intestines, liver, and heart. It's good for diarrhea, colitis, dysentery, so good for all bowel or colon or intestinal issues. Also helps to stop internal and external bleeding. So this is important for internal bleeding, say bleeding ulcers or uterine fibroids, but also good if you cut yourself on the outside of your skin, and it'll help the blood clot and stop the bleeding from that. So very good. That's a good herb to have in like a first aid kit, just the powder you can pour onto a cut. So these are, just some of those things that I would say one can have on hand. And the bottom of this handout kind of talks about the importance of having an herb garden. This is something I highly recommend. I've been gardening for probably 25 years. It's very easy. If you are not in a place where you have land that you can grow and put into the earth, you can always do gardens in containers, pots. You can make containers that maybe weren't designed to be pots, but you can make them as long as there's drainage and you can add the soil to it. But me, I pretty much only do well with putting things into the ground. Stuff in pots I usually don't do well with at all. But I think this is an excellent way to take power or empower yourself and take control of your food and medicine supply. So growing, even if you start out with culinary herbs that you mainly will cook with, we know that all of these herbs will still have a medicinal effect. So if it's rosemary or lavender or thyme or sage or peppermint, all of these are very easy herbs to grow. And so this is a start. You can then start by growing, potatoes or yams or carrots or string beans or kale, something. Tomatoes are extremely easy, to grow. But find something that maybe you eat a lot of and see how, try your hand at growing it. And that, I think, will make you feel really empowered that you can at least supply yourself with those foods and herbs that you can consume for your well-being. The next section is on homeopathic remedies. Homeopathics are a little different from herbs, but they are natural occurring substances. However, they are not all plant-based. Some are minerals, some are even from animal, mainly insect parts, but these are all natural occurring substances that can help heal the body. So basically, these things you can find in most health food stores. Usually they will be in either tablet or pellet form. Sometimes you will find combination formulas in a liquid form, but basically homeopathy is what pharmacology is based off of. So what the difference is pharmaceutical drugs or drugs that you will get from your standard clinic or pharmacy or what have you, may even have some components of natural substances, but then they've added other synthetic, chemical, or man-made substances to it. Homeopathy is strictly that natural occurring substance, okay? And the way that you take it is what we call sublingually. You put it under your tongue and let it dissolve into the mucous membrane in the body. So it gets into your bloodstream quicker, okay? And so it's a more direct means of getting in that substance. So a lot of times this is better than swallowing a pill and it having to go through your digestive system. So homeopathics can be very, very powerful. Some of the names will be very strange. Some of them are long. Most of the times they will use abbreviations for them. But I just wanted to put this handout in here. And the concept is that like cures like. So in a certain situation, what would cause that illness in the right dosage at the right scheduling, that same substance would then correct that issue, right? This is a great example of that. Allium cepa is onion. It's plant-based. It comes from the onion. This is what it treats. It is known to cause tearing of the eyes and dripping of the nose. It is a frequent remedy for common cold, hay fever, right? Conditions that cause teary eyes, runny nose, that sort of thing. So see how that makes sense. So in the right dosage and potency, this same thing will heal or cure the condition that it will cause. The other pages, they talk about arnica, which is great for like injuries, shock, nerve pain, things of that nature. Excuse me. We go to chamomilla, which comes from the chamomile plant, which acts as a sedative. Hypericum comes from another plant, St. John's wort, which is also good for like nerve injuries. It's a good antiviral. Ignatia comes from the St. Ignatius bean. This is good for like mental health concerns like grief and anxiety and depression. Magnesia phosphorica, this is the phosphate of magnesia. So this is mineral based, right? So this is good for cramps, menstrual cramps and other cramps, right? Nuts, that's just the name of the nut, right? But this is good for people who've overdrank and consumed too much alcohol, or conditions where either vomiting relieves the situation or where one is feeling nauseous and are feeling as if they need to throw up. Pulsatilla comes from the wildflower. This is given for symptoms of like having fear, like really clingy children, people who have a quickly changing emotional state. So this is good for that. Rust tox, this is poison ivy. So we know that in certain dosages or in certain contacts of that oil that's in that poison ivy will give you the rashes and all of that, right? Well, in the right dosage, rust tox treats the symptoms of poison ivy. This is another handout that talks about homeopathic remedies, but this is presented in a natural first aid kit. So these are the homeopathic remedies that are excellent for injuries like burns, bruises, insect bites, heat stroke, things of that nature, right? I have certainly experienced that traveling to Ghana all of these years. I have, as a queen mother, I've been put out in the scorching sun, even under an umbrella. So I have suffered from some heat exhaustion and heat stroke on several occasions. It's almost guaranteed to happen. It doesn't matter how many people are fanning you and how much you try to be shielded. So these are things that and among other things, but there are remedies that I travel with just to address some of these conditions that are sort of inevitable, especially if you're not used to being in the scorching sun for periods of time. But scrapes, sprains, strains, eye injuries, this handout will give you some remedies to have on hand that would address those things as well. So let me just stop here and maybe look at any comments or questions that are here. And then we will talk about essential oils. And then we'll talk about superfoods. So I think I'm doing pretty good with time. Again, I kind of rolled through these. We kind of condensed the classes. I have a lot of information. I didn't want to really take out information, so I kind of compressed it. And so some things I just won't spend as much time going over because I want you to have this information, even if you have to reference it later. So let's see what we have here. And if I can make a suggestion, I know the administrators of the group here are concerned of, feeling like we want to have a regular dialogue with people in the WhatsApp group. If you are in the WhatsApp group, definitely some questions or more so comments and questions, feel free to post in the group in case I do not get to some of the questions or can't comment to some of the comments that are being posted during the class. Feel free, that's sort of an extension. If we don't get to everything during the class, you can always present it in the WhatsApp group, okay? So, okay, these are not for me. Good day, good day. All right, don't think. All right, yeah, so these are not for me. I'm sure if it's Yvonne that's still the host, I'm sure she's reviewing these. Some of these are requests for being added to groups and things of that nature. And there's a process in which to do that. So I'm sure she'll respond with that or post the way to get into the WhatsApp group. There are some rules you have to follow. There's a process you have to do. Thank you for your comments about the herbs. Yes, it's crucial that we know what's naturally existing for us to heal ourselves. Yeah, less meat. Yeah, so even if you're not vegetarian or don't go vegan, that's an excellent place to start. Limiting, what you're consuming. The things that you know are not of health benefit to you, just start decreasing them, cutting them out, limiting yourself to 3 or 4 times a week, then limiting it to a couple of times a week. There's always a way to kind of wean out or wean yourself off of things. Oh, wonderful. Oh, good. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're listening and utilizing the information. Yeah. Yeah, but a lot of what I mentioned are there in Africa. But yeah, as I said before, go to your local person. It may not be the actual herbs that I'm listing, but your local traditional healer that works with herbs will have what's local for you there. And I really don't even know what else to say in that regard. Yeah, vitamins. And let me say a word on vitamins. Vitamins should always be food-based, meaning made from foods, like some of the superfoods that we're about to go over. They should be based on or based with herbs and spices, not synthetic things. So if you're doing a vitamin, make sure that it is, you know, whole food based or food based. Yeah, and organic is always best. And, you know, if you're doing your own gardening, you certainly may not know the full history of your land or your yard or what have you, but what you can do is, you know, endeavor to not add any pesticides or herbicides to kill off, you know, anything. Find the natural plants to grow that will deter, you know, different insects and things like that, rather than putting the pesticides on it. So you wouldn't have what we would call certified organic foods, but what you would have is foods that you know have been limited in any kind of pesticides and things that you're growing, because you're growing it yourself and you know you're not putting those things in your garden. Pulsatilla. Okay, sure. So pulsatilla, someone's asking about the pulsatilla. And I have used pulsatilla, and I don't think that handout probably gave a good explanation. Yeah, so pulsatilla is more so sort of like for weeping sort of conditions, like when someone is like emotionally imbalanced. So it's usually some kind of frayed emotional or psychological state that you would need you know, to take pulsatilla. This would also be the person who aims to please everybody, like the people pleaser. And a lot of children end up needing it because they want to, you know, please their parents and stuff like that. But if you Google it, you'll find a lot of information. And that's one thing about homeopathics. Even in the kits that you buy with the homeopathics, they always come with a leaflet that will explain exactly what each of the remedies do and what their indications are. Yeah, we have a whole section on stress and anxiety. I don't know if it's next week. It may be either week 3 or week 4. So we will definitely address that. And what I'm also going to put here, I think some people ask for the handout. What you will need to do is nanaakua1 at gmail.com. If you will send that email request to me, then I'll forward you the handout if you're not in the WhatsApp group. Okay, but every week I post them in the WhatsApp group. But for those, and I know not everybody that comes in on the call are in the WhatsApp group. So let's move on to aromatherapy. This is, I can turn this, okay. So aromatherapy is basically using essential oils to promote certain moods and conditions, emotional or mental health conditions within the body, the subconscious, and the conscious mind. So basically, essential oils can be used in baths, they can be used in compresses, skin creams, massage oils, diffusers, so that the aroma is emitted throughout the air of your room or your car. And even if it's food grade, you can also take essential oils internally, okay? So essential oils have a lot of various uses. This handout here, I had a chart and I just sort of photocopied it, but I liked it because it touches on each thing. So I won't go over each of these, but it talks about different ways to use it, the different oils, which oils to use as carrier oils, how you can use it in mouthwashes, as compresses and baths and massage oils, and so on and so forth. And then it gives you the actual essential oils that are great to mix together, and then what healing uses or what energy that particular oil uses, okay? I love essential oils. I use them daily. I use certain ones in my diffuser, eucalyptus, peppermint. They're really great if you have any sort of sinus problems, asthma, bronchitis, any history of any kind of lung or respiratory issues. If you are suffering from any kind of stress, anxiety, you're just feeling kind of gloomy, citrus oils are really good and uplifting. They also are great for enhancing your breathing and strengthening the lungs. So things like orange and tangerine and lime and things of that nature are great for that. But then you have other ones that are great, like antimicrobial, like meaning they will kill off different types of disease-causing pathogens. Like viruses or bacteria or what have you. So like during this pandemic, I've made my own sanitizing spray. I haven't bothered. Of course, you can base it with aloe gel if you want it to be a gel, but I just put alcohol, like the isopropyl alcohol, or the alcohol you find in a drugstore or a pharmacy, and I just add the essential oils to it. So in those types of things, I add stuff like clove, right? So clove helps kill off different microbes, right? But in addition to that, it's good for muscle pain, colds, diarrhea, toothache, stuff like that. But then I might also put in my sanitizing spray. I've used stuff like rosemary. Rosemary is good for kind of killing off certain microbes, but it's also good for anxiety, depression, hangover, PMS, respiratory functions, things of that nature. I've also used tea tree in my sanitizing spray, but we know in addition to that, tea tree is also great for congestion, for arthritis, for stings and bites, but it is an antiseptic, it is an antibiotic, and it does boost the immune system. Other herbs or essential oils, I should say, such as, I want to go back to sandalwood, like sandalwood. A lot of times people just like the scent or the aroma of sandalwood because it has a really nice earthy scent, but sandalwood has great healing powers as well. It's great for stomach cramps, nausea, depression, herpes, candida, menses, and headaches. And even your spiritual herbs or scents like frankincense. Frankincense is great for mental fatigue. It's good for arthritis, aging, skin, respiratory problems, helps induce dreaming, and all of that. So even herbs that I keep saying herbs, even essential oils, these plants that these oils are derived from, even though we may like their scents or their aromas, know that they have other healing powers as well. Okay, neroli is another great one. It helps lower blood pressure. It's an antidepressant and a sedative, good for insomnia, shock, nerves, skin care, scars, PMS. So really take your time to study a lot of these essential oils and use them in your baths, use them in your diffusers, use them on your skin to heal your skin, but just remember to dilute them. In most cases, the essential oils should not be used directly on the skin, but should be used in what we call a carrier oil. And these oils would be any kind of nut or seed or vegetable-based oil. It could be almond or apricot or grapeseed or olive or sesame or avocado or hazelnut oil. Any of those vegetable-based or nut oils, add a few drops of the essential oil to that if you want to use it as a skin oil for a moisturizer, or if you want to use it to massage your body or your feet. Make sure you dilute it with a carrier oil. So the next thing, let me turn this around also. So the next and the last part that we'll talk about is superfoods, okay? So I started off talking about what I call super herbs, right? A made up name. And I really feel like, did we talk about this? I feel like we talked about some superfoods. Did we or did we not? I want to say in the section before there were maybe some things, but I don't think we went over this because this is definitely in this week's packet. But basically, superfoods are basically foods that, just like the herbs I mentioned, these are foods that are packed with a lot of nutrition. So you can't go wrong because you're going to get a load of vitamins and minerals in these foods. Fresh, organic, raw if possible, right? But these are foods that give your body like super nutrition, okay? And so I just want to run through a few of these. And then what I will have as your assignment is I would like you to go through and pick out. So I know one of the comments was that a lot of the things that are being mentioned are not necessarily available every place that you all are. So go through the list, see which foods are available in your area, and then maybe research, experiment, figure out some ways to utilize those in your diet, in your food regimen on a daily basis, alternating them, trying different ones out, really trying to include this into your diet. So superfoods are things like almonds, right? We know that almonds are high in vitamin E, and it's a high source of protein, among other things. Broccoli rabi, that's a particular type of rabi. It's the green leafy part of the broccoli, right? And we know that it's high in vitamins A, C, and K. Does a lot of things, strengthen the bones, decreases hypertension, helps against Alzheimer's, a lot of that. Avocados, we know that avocados have what we call the healthy fats, the essential fatty acids that we need in our body, right? So avocados, raw milk, can't often find raw milk, but you can usually find this in kefir. This is a big part of like the Indian diet, but this is a high source of A, D, C, and B vitamins. All right, wheatgrass is another. Wheatgrass is packed with, there are some people that do a wheatgrass, they call it a shot. It's the juice of wheatgrass, and it comes in a little amount, like the shot glass. And what is that, maybe an ounce? I think the shot maybe an ounce. But it's highly nutritive. It has iron, calcium, magnesium, amino acids, vitamins A, C, and E. But wheatgrass is excellent. If you can include that in your diet, you'll definitely improve your health. Salmon is another one, also because of the essential fatty acids that it naturally contains, the omega-3 and 6. Flax seeds, another highly nutritive food, easy to add into your hot cereals, your Milo, your millet, your oats, your wheat, whatever hot cereals. You can add it into your smoothies. You can add it on top of salads. But this is packed with B6, copper, phosphorus, folate, magnesium, manganese, a lot of good nutrition there. Blueberry, same thing, has a lot of phytonutrients, vitamin C, and fiber. Cinnamon's one of my favorite spices, has a lot of health benefits. It helps with urinary tract infections, soothes the stomach, improves brain function, helps with glucose metabolism. So we know if you're diabetic, this is something you want to add into your diet. Sweet potatoes, good in beta carotene, B6, C, fiber, potassium. So we know that sweet potatoes, we want to add sweet potatoes, and we really want to do sweet potatoes more so than white potatoes. So if we are able to access sweet potatoes, that's what we really want. More superfoods are things like acai berries. And a lot of this comes from other parts of the world. So if it's not accessible where you are, I understand. So these are sort of the berries and the food supplements that people add to shakes, to smoothies, cereals, salads, things like that. Not necessarily things that you kind of eat in its whole form. You'll usually add it to other foods, but acai berries, goji berries, cocoa powder, seaweed, chia seeds, that's become very popular. And then mango steams, I think is the last one. Oh no, and maca powder. So all of these are food supplements, superfoods, things that you'll usually, again, add to your shakes and smoothies and things of that nature. All have benefit in terms of increasing vitality or stamina or libido, or giving you a lot of nutrients, healing, have a lot of minerals, things of that nature. But these are foods that you can add to what you're already eating. Stuff like seaweed, that's not always the most pleasant taste. It definitely tastes very minerally, very seawater-like, but you might add it to soups and stews and things of that nature, okay? So these are our superfoods. So we've talked about super herbs, we talked about superfoods, we've talked about essential oils, we've talked about homeopathic remedies. And so what I would like you to do today or before next class is really review the things that we could not go into with detail. Is, like I said earlier, pick which of these superfoods you can access in your area and start to review how it is that you can find and utilize these in your diet and how you think it will benefit you, okay? Feel free also to review the other items that I've mentioned, such as the homeopathics that you may not really be familiar with, and the essential oils and the herbs. Again, go to your local herbalist, see what herbs are available for whatever health concerns or health issues, you know, that you have. And I just want to see if there's other questions. Okay, yeah. And if you email me, and if you can just remind me to send you all of the packets in case you never will each week get the packets on WhatsApp. What I've tried to do a couple of times is, if you request it and you say I'm not on WhatsApp, I try to send like all 4 or what have you. But if I forget to do that, just remind me to do that. And then it is next week, and I think someone asked about stress and anxiety. That is our topic for next week. So we will talk about effective ways of handling stress, some stress busters, some self-massage and reflexology. We'll talk about flower essences or flower remedies that help balance the emotions when we are stressed. We'll talk about herbs that are nervine or sedative herbs that will help with stress and anxiety and insomnia, all due to, you know, life's stressors. And then we'll talk about a personal care plan. So we will talk about what things cause stress, what things, you know, can you control, what things are in your life that's causing stress. And so that's next week. So I'll look forward to seeing everyone here then. What I want to highlight and remind you of also, and what I'll try to do is maybe hand this in separately as an assignment for you to do for this coming week, in addition to the things I've mentioned, is at the back of this packet, and I probably should have not stopped sharing. So let me scroll down a little further. So what I've done at the end of each packet is give sort of a lesson or a handout or an assignment, right? Okay, so if you'll note in your packet, there is a handout that I want you to review. Review what herbs did resonate with you, which ones stood out, which ones you find will be most helpful. We have that first list with those first 2 pages that list different herbs, as well as conditions that the herbs will help address. But then we had the Nature's Cure handout that talked about what herbs you should have on hand, right? Go through and write out which herbs you can find in your area or that you're familiar with, and which herbs you think will be of use for you. Same thing with the homeopathic remedies. Go through which ones stand out to you. Someone asked about pulsatilla, for example. You know, if it's one that resonates with you, write that down, make note of it, study it. Nutritional supplements that we talked about. It could be some of the superfoods, the goji berry, the mangosteen, the maca powder, some of those things. The superfoods like the almonds or the salmon. Write down the ones that stood out for you so that you'll have it in the front of your mind and be able to incorporate it into your daily routine so that you can improve your health bit by bit. Add something each day or each week, whatever is feasible for you based on your schedule, right? And then the next part, this is the other part of the assignment. Again, pick whichever day, work on a bit of this each day. Next week, what herbs or homeopathic or essential oils that will address some of these health concerns or complaints, right? Which ones are good for fever? Which ones are good for pain, for upset stomach, for PMS? We discussed, I think, all of these. There were several that I mentioned that dealt with high blood pressure or diabetes, right? So this is your assignment. Go through and write out these things. So this is your study guide. This is your assignment / study guide. So again, this information is for you to have to use so that you can implement them. So you don't want to just sit and listen to the information. I've tried to create this packet and these questions so that you can actually implement these things, okay? So I think I am nearing my time. I don't think there are any other questions in the chat. And I think my time is up. So thanks for listening. I'll see you all back here next week. If you don't have the packet, email me. And as always, I bid you good health and peace.
Thank you so much, Nana Akua.
Thanks, Yvonne. Peace to you all.
It's a thank you. Up next, we have Dr. Rita Lynn. Dr. Red, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And you'll see me in a second.
Okay.
Are you ready for me?
Yes, we are ready.
Okay, wonderful. So welcome everyone. You'll see me in a second. This is our second, well, last week was our introductory class. And this week is our first real content class. And you'll see me in a second. We were watching a film called The Journey of Man, A Genetic Odyssey by Spencer Wells. And so I'm going to, for those of you who didn't have a chance to, who are not in the group, right? Because we have some people who are not necessarily in the group, but are on the actual call. I will be sharing some of that. But first, what I want to do is, do I have the permission to share a document? Can you?
Yes, you are allowed.
Okay, one moment then. So I'm going to start off with sharing the syllabus once again and going over some of the objectives, okay? So one moment, let me just share that screen.
Dr. Red, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm about to share my screen, so. Hold on. Let's see. Screen. Okay. Okay, so this is the syllabus for the course. And I'm gonna assume, I might read it over for you, but I really just want to jump to one particular item on the syllabus, which has number of items, which are the objectives for the course, learning outcomes and objectives. And I'm posting it there for those of you who don't have access to the WhatsApp group, but you want to know what we're doing. So that's it right there. And I'm going to go over a couple of items. I'll also be sharing the readings just to make it easy for those of you who are in the course or not in the course in terms of following along with what I'm going to cover today. But as you all know, this is a course on Pan-African history and organizing. And the approach to the course is really more or less an ideological development course where we develop ourselves in terms of the history, looking at the theory and practices of Pan-Africanism, which ideology or ideology, as some people might call it, is defined as theory and practice. So this week, we get into the nuts and bolts of just that, but the course is to help you, one, understand what Pan-Africanism is, how it's defined, and then secondly, how to identify through action, theory and action, Pan-Africanism in essence. So I'll read this a little bit just so people can get an understanding, those of you who are just joining the course. An introduction to Pan-African history and organizing, an ideological development course, surveys the history of Pan-Africanism as a theory and practice. The seminar is structurally designed to examine and engage in a critical analysis of the theories and practices of Pan-Africanism as both a political and ideological impetus. Sorry, folks. Hold on. Theory and practice, both a theories and practices of Pan-Africanism as both political and ideological impetus for organizing African Black people globally. The course begins with the historical foundations of Pan-Africanism at the turn of the 20th century as a budding concept, and that is exactly what we'll be talking about today. The chapter you read on Booker T. Washington, Pan-Africanism and Pan-Africanists is precisely that. It recreates the African world at the moment in time that Pan-Africanism was a budding concept, right? So the course begins with the historical foundations of Pan-Africanism at the turn of the 20th century as a budding concept in the African diaspora and the Americas. It becomes the impetus for international, I'm doing this on my device and I don't have it on Do Not Disturb, but I will do that in a second. It becomes the impetus for international organizing in Europe, the first Pan-African Conference, 1900, and finds its highest expression in Africa as liberation struggles against colonialism and the ideal continental unity. Many have questioned the measurable results produced by Pan-Africanism. This course explores this idea and qualifies the practice and production of Pan-Africanism in light of measurable social, political, economic, and material gains for African people. This is one major item that I'm going to focus on a lot. Being able to qualify and talk about and weigh and measure the actual results, what does Pan-Africanism produce for us? Because for a long time, Pan-Africanism has largely been seen as just this esoteric kind of thing. Oh, all African people, we identify with each other. All Black people, we all recognize each other. But in terms of production for us, that has been questionable. Now, I have written a book, and we will look at an example where Pan-Africanism has produced measurable gains for us. However, that is not commonplace, okay? And that's not common knowledge, what we are going to, the two cases we're going to look at in the Booker T. Washington in Africa book. That being said, this course explores the idea and qualifies the practice and production of Pan-Africanism in light of measurable social, political, economic, and material gains for African and Black people globally by examining policy cases, conference resolutions, and various approaches employed by early proponents of Pan-Africanism, African nationalist organizational bodies, and institutions. So I want to just highlight some of the learning outcomes for this particular course and which ones we're actually going to talk about today. A working definition of Pan-Africanism, knowledge of its specific history, development, and emergence of an ideology, theory, and practice in the world. We are going to address that today. And that will come from the context of your readings on the Booker T. Washington and Africa book, but the chapter on Booker T. Washington, Pan-Africanism and Pan-Africanists. Not because it is the only thing written on the history of Pan-Africanism. However, it is one that I know for sure, the readings that address the larger part of the African world, meaning Africans on the continent, the Caribbean, Central and South America, okay, in those spaces, and doesn't just give you a narrow view of the history of Pan-Africanism as, you know, proponents from the United States or from the Caribbean, but a larger picture in terms of the contributions, right? So you should have read that, but I will revisit it. The ability to qualify. So this is what you should know at the end of this course: the ability to identify and qualify Pan-Africanist thought, speech, and action across various technological mediums, social media platforms, virtual realities, and brick and mortar spaces. Also, 3, the ability to qualify whether policies, legislation, organizational initiatives, and or general practices are Pan-Africanist in nature and beneficial to African and Black people. The ability to identify imperialism, colonialism, and neocolonialism as oppressive and exploitative systems as they have manifested throughout the African world and its diasporas. 5, the means and methods through which African and Black people have organized, fought, resisted, and liberated themselves and nations from imperialism, colonialism, and the ways in which neocolonialism is currently being resisted. The role of Pan-Africanism as a primary strategy and tactic in the effort to eliminate racism and xenophobia is directly connected to the work you're doing with I Love Black People. 7, the ability to differentiate multiple perspectives through an analysis of different case studies built on measured evidence-based arguments and research essays. We are going to look at a number of sources and scenarios and cases that are factual and really sharpen our ability to identify the Pan-Africanist nature of those cases, the objectives and lines and the ideological positions of the players, the agents, the actors in those cases, in real life and in historical context. So you should be able, not just in theory, to understand the idea of Pan-Africanism and the practice, but also be able to identify that. So we will use a range of sources, looking at institutional organizational bodies that organize around this idea of Pan-Africanism and producing a more humane world society for us. So A is the ability to apply the knowledge, which is the essence what I just said, acquired in the seminar, to the active role and responsibility as ambassadors of I Love Black People in eradicating racism and xenophobia. And 9, the ability to qualify again, everything before declaring it substantial, beneficial to African and Black people locally and globally. I can't stress that enough, right? I think all around the world, we have a tendency to, we like symbol, we like motif, we like representation. However, we can like those things, but we also must know that in order to sustain ourselves, in order to build and thrive, that we need a little bit more than symbols. We need the very things that we're deprived of and lacking, right? Which are peace, stability, material gains, and things of that nature, political gains, in order to really truly thrive. And so in this course, you'll see as we evaluate policy cases, case studies, and other things, we will be looking to qualify how it is beneficial to African people, to Black people specifically, on a local level and globally. And then finally, 10, develop a measurable results orientation, which is related to the item above, regarding business practices and services, policy and political agendas, legislative initiatives, organizational efforts, and institutional practices. So in all those spaces, we want to, at the end of the day, see what it produces for us, okay? It's not enough to say, hey, and this is probably, it's evident all over. I think it's most obvious on the continent of Africa, in the sense that you have leadership that looks like the masses of the people very often. However, that's not enough. That's almost symbolic, in the sense that what does looking like someone produce for us? Nothing. We want to make sure that not only does the person look like us, but the person acts in our interests, is an agent of our interests, our collective interests, and our well-being and our advancement. So those are the course objectives. Now, the seminar themes are, hold on, sorry you all, I'm actually traveling, and so I have people trying to get in touch with me. But I'll go on. Seminar themes: Pan-Africanism, unity as the primary organizing tool, weapon, strategy for eradicating racism and xenophobia against African and Black people. The historical role, importance, and use of the dialectical relationship between African and Black people globally as an effective strategy and tactic in combating white supremacy, racism, and xenophobia, which is a global pandemic. This is the thing. We are doing that right now. We're having a dialectical relationship. We are engaging and dialoguing, communicating back and forth. And what we're doing is not new. We have been doing this since we have been in this situation at least 500 years, 400 to 500 years, since Europeans, just to be very direct, since Europeans come out of Europe and create this fictitious construct called race and impose it on us and the world, okay, to the point where, yes, it is a pathology and it is a pandemic because it marginalizes us and it exploits and oppresses us. And so since that, the advent of that worldview and practice, we have, as Africans, been organizing everywhere we are, right? I mean, one of the greatest and biggest examples of that was 1804 with the Haitian Revolution. It wasn't just a revolution for that little place on the island called Hispaniola, present day Haiti and Dominican Republic. It becomes a safe haven everywhere in the Western world, and all the Western nations were engaging in slavery. But there was one place that wasn't, and it stood as a free African republic, and that would be present day Haiti. And so, you know, we have been, and how did people know? We were in communication with each other. People heard about Haiti and would try to move, you know, in the world towards Haiti because they knew it was a free African republic in a hemisphere that was full of enslavement and racial pathology and exploitation. Okay, so synthesizing and application of Pan-Africanist thought, speech, and action in everyday scenarios and challenges. So really on a basic level, we will be talking about throughout the course, you know, what thought, you know, so ideological people who theorize about Pan-Africanism, how did they, because not all of our Pan-African proponents that we discuss here will be the same. Okay, they will have different, you know, little, you know, like a cherry on the top. They will have a little different spin to them, but at the core, still the same objective, right? To eradicate oppression and exploitation of Black people, of African people. So we will look at that in thought. We will look at it in practice. And we will look at it in speech, right? I mean, we will cover a lot of very well-known revolutionaries on the continent of Africa who will talk about precisely this. And what is that like? Meaning Amilcar Cabral, for example, who we'll cover, will talk about, you know, history and culture in his speeches as tools of liberation. How do we resume? How do we recover from a colonial Africa? A world dominated by imperialist nations. What does that look like for us, right? Reclaiming our culture and using them as tools of liberation. So we'll talk about, you know, in speech, what Pan-Africanism is and action. Of course, everyday scenarios, you know, that you would encounter in terms of, you know, smaller agents and actors, and I don't even want to say smaller, but everyday agents and actors, are they Pan-Africanist or not, right? So I'll get more into that as we go through, but the role of education, specifically history, in eliminating ignorance, divisiveness, propaganda, and individualism amongst African and Black people in an effort to achieve Pan-Africanism unity, right? So when you hear Pan-Africanism, I want you in your mind to think of that as synonymous and exchangeable with unity. And then the global Pan-Africanism, the unification of African people for the purpose of eradicating exploitation and oppression, racism as a direct solution to the condition of African people. So in other words, we're not, you know, you all are in an organization that directly relates to a global objective, right? Everywhere you are,
as an agent of I Love Black People, you are working to make the world safer for Black people, for African people everywhere we are. And it's totally possible, right? 1.6 billion on the continent and hundreds of thousands outside of that. So the reality is we actually have the numbers to attack these systems and practices known as racism and xenophobia. Okay, but it only comes through organized struggle. And we also will talk about that, right? And the key to all of that is working with a collective ideology and moving in unison. So the first week here, so those were the seminar themes. The first week here, we're working with what you see here, The Journey of Man, a Genetic Odyssey. And I put the link there. I'm going to give you a little bit of the footage. And I might just skip to the end because Spencer Wells says something interesting. Now, why did I give you this film? I gave you this film because anytime we talk about human beings, I want us all to be very clear about the fact that, you know, for most of the time that human beings have been on this earth, meaning 200,000 to 300,000 years, human was synonymous with African. African is what it meant to be human. And let me say it a different way, which is that no human beings live outside a cultural construct, right? How we eat, how we live, how we worship, how we bury our dead and our ancestors. So how we worship our ancestors, how we revere God, how we acknowledge God in the presence of the Creator. All of those things are culture. No human being lives outside of a cultural construct. The first human beings are undisputably coming from the continent of Africa. Therefore, for most of the 200 to 300,000 years on this earth, humanity has been African first. And Blackness, right? It has been our natural characteristic. I always like to say to my students in the university level, melanin is the human jacket. You don't want to leave home without it. And for most of the time in the world, we didn't leave home without it. Now we're out in the world with it, okay? It is a natural characteristic. However, race, this idea of race is not real. It's not scientifically proven. It cannot be scientifically proven, okay? So I wanted you all to just get some idea of what it was like to see someone scientifically address a theory that humanity came from Africa and then prove it through DNA, so that when you engage, you are solid in your understanding that what it means to be human is African. And yes, a natural consequence of being African is being Black, okay? Being identifiably Black, by being identifiably melanated, right? That's what gives us our complexions, our color, right? So this was the perfect film. And sometimes people, not you all, but some folks need to see someone who doesn't look like us doing this work so that they can hear it, right? Because sometimes when they see us, they can't hear it. They're so caught up on who we are in a racial society, they can't get the truth from those of us who are still identifiably African and well melanated. And so Spencer Wells, just on the hard science, he does that. And I like to open up the conversation with that. Just when we study anything, history, political science, all of that. Why? Because when you're talking about humanity, who are you talking about first and foremost? You're talking about people from the African continent, undisputably. Okay. So I just want to bring us all, I want to raise all ships to that level of understanding and knowledge that that is who is human first and foremost. Okay. Without a without a doubt. Okay. That is factual, that is scientific. Now, the rest of the film, substantiates, right? Goes around and tests DNA all over the world. And then, of course, he maps and explains how we have populated the world, okay? Now you get a understanding why the work you're doing is necessary, because the attitudes of those in contemporary time about being African or about being from Africa, they harbor some of the things that this organization is struggling and working and organizing to address and struggle against. Okay, so let me rephrase that, because this organization is not struggling. It addresses those attitudes we saw in the film from the Navajo, right, in the Americas, from the Aborigine in Australia. Those attitudes about being from Africa or being an African first and foremost, or that their progenitors are African. Those attitudes, although maybe not overt racism, were racialized and carried with it some of the overtones that are indicative of white supremacy. That being said, that's what this organization is designed to address, the evidence of racism and xenophobia. Because let's be very clear, most racists will never announce that they're racist. And most people who practice racism won't wear a sign, and very often will look a lot like us, because we internalize racist ideology, right? And so although not from the dominant oppressive group, a person can be brown, from Asia, from the Americas, and harbor racist ideology and be willing to carry it out too, because that is the sentiment, the tone, the climate that we live under. And so we are working, we are organizing to not struggle, but struggle against that. Okay, so that in essence what that film should have done for you. And at the end, Spencer Wells talks to a number of people, and they do a photo shoot, and they all talk about where they're from. And he ultimately says that we are all African, because he has captured the scientific evidence to say that the only human being on the earth comes from Africa. And in essence, that means we are all Africans who, in essence, migrated around to the four corners of the earth. So let me say it another way. All the world's indigenous people were African first. Most of us here are still identifiably African, and it's an honorable thing. And so the point is that, you know, we are the natural inhabitants of the earth. We have a right to walk this earth free of negation, oppression, exploitation in every way and in all its forms. We have a right to do that. And I'll get more into that too, because there's some items that come out of African organizational bodies that affirm this, that declare this, for us long before we started this class or started doing this work. So this is, a sentiment by African people, by Black people, the right to walk this earth as human beings without oppression and domination that has echoed through the ages, so you all are right in the tradition, so to speak, of this practice. So that being said, that's what the purpose of the film was. He has some contradictions, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I don't co-sign that, but we are utilizing him and the film just for the items that I said, the scientific value of it all. And but we'll address in Q&A if you like, just some of the things that you might have noticed, because he certainly has contradictions as a European person in that context. That being said, the other item that we covered was Booker T. Washington in Africa, the Making and Pan-Africanist, the chapter on Pan-African history. So in other words, it was the chapter on Booker T. Washington, Pan-Africanism, and Pan-Africanist. If you all see that there under readings, 614 to 619, that was given to you in WhatsApp. And I'm going to just talk about that initial phase in Pan-African history that caused us to organize in the world. Okay, I'm going to scroll through just so you can have the images in your mind of the actual figures, proponents that would emerge. But I wanted to let you guys see me for a second. So, so I'll stop there and I'm going to go to the text. Okay. Okay. So can you all see? No, you can't see me. You should be able to see me. Okay, good. You can see me, I think. Okay. Yes. So you should be able to see me. So the book you're actually, that chapter that you read is coming from here, T. Washington, Pan-Africanism and Pan-Africanist. And it is a book that I actually wrote, and we're just using for this moment that one chapter. The reason I'm using this book is, like I said, simply because of the fact that, let's see if you can see me better here. Okay, simply because of the fact that I know for sure that it covers the specific history of Pan-Africanism, which is really important for us to understand. The concepts, and I will reference the reading on and off, the concept in and of itself, and it looks like I don't have a lot of time left. The concept of Pan-Africanism emerges around the turn of the 20th century. A gentleman by the name of Henry Sylvester Williams is actually the initiator of something called the First Pan-African Conference. And that's important for you all to understand. The First Pan-African Conference was the first of its kind. Henry Sylvester Williams was from the African Association out of Trinidad. He would come, and residing in London in the UK, where this conference was organized, and African people from all around the world, Black people from all around the world, would converge in this space for this historic conference. And it was absolutely a historic conference because it was the first of its kind, and because there it is established that the very objective of Pan-Africanism is to eradicate oppression and exploitation of African people everywhere we are. So a bare bones definition emerges, which is unity, right? Unity. And when you're talking about us, Black people, African people, unity, our unity is called Pan-Africanism. Unity for the purpose of eradicating oppression and exploitation. Not unity for the purpose of having a party, not unity for the purpose of celebrating our particular history or our struggles, unity for the purpose of work. The work is eradicating oppression and exploitation everywhere we are. And so Henry Sylvester Williams, under the African Association, would work on this, organize this, and yes, Washington and others, Du Bois, who is a very important figure in the history of Pan-Africanism, W.E.B. Du Bois, would all be involved in either the planning and or attending of this conference. and they would agree on what that bare bones definition is. We will look at the Congresses going forward, and I'll explain that a little bit more later. That being said, this concept of Pan-Africanism had never existed but before, okay? And had never existed before and was budding in the world. So none of them were experienced at this. Now, it doesn't mean they were not experienced in the struggle. It just means that this concept is a concept, a term, an idea, and what we hope is seen as an ideology had never been expressed in this way prior to this. I want to read just the opening of the chapter that Washington, to the beginning of Booker T. Washington Pan-Africanist chapter. And in essence, it gives you an idea of how broad, how engulfing this concept should be across the African world, right? That we share the same dilemma, condition, struggle worldwide. And I basically used a quote from The Story of the Negro, The Rise of the Race of Slavery by Booker T. Washington to exhibit this, because I think he said it best. So at the open of the chapter, and I will still scroll through the chapter for those of you who are not in the WhatsApp group and don't have this, but I'll read this small point for you all. The chapter opens with this quote: "There is, however, a tie which few white men can understand, which binds the American Negro and to the African Negro, which unites the Black man of Brazil and the Black man of Liberia, which is constantly drawing into closer relations all the scattered African peoples, whether they are in the old world or the new." Let me read that again to be very clear. I had a little stumbling in the beginning. "There is, however, a tie which few white men can understand, which binds the American Negro," and yes, this is a period where they're still using that term, "to the African Negro, which unites the Black man of Brazil and the Black man of Liberia, which is constantly drawing into closer relations all the scattered African peoples, whether they are in the old world or the new. I have rarely met in America anyone of my race who did not, in one way or another, show a deep interest in everything connected with Africa. The millions of Negroes in America are almost as much interested, for example, in the future of Liberia and Abyssinia, which you know is Ethiopia, as they are in their own country. There is always a peculiar and scarcely definable bond that binds one Black man to another Black man, whether in Africa, Jamaica, Haiti, or the United States." What he is saying is that we have a common bond, we have a common thread, we are family, and we are in a common struggle. Let me go, because let me share my screen one more time, because I want to get to this very moment in Pan-African history so that you all can see that this concept called Pan-Africanism isn't a one-party thing. It is a collective contribution from African people on the continent of Africa, in the Caribbean, in the United States, and various places coming together to say, this is who we are, and this is what we intend to bring about for ourselves. And so I don't want there to be a misunderstanding about how broad the contributions are, right? This concept would move onto the continent and probably have its highest expression there. However, it is budding out in the diaspora amongst the children of Africa, right? So let me just share this very quickly. Hold on. 1 second, I'm gonna bring you to the WhatsApp group. Okay. Let me find, hold on one second. So I'll keep talking while I bring this up. But the idea was that every area in which African people inhabited would make a major contribution to this concept of Pan-Africanism. So I'm going to the text and I'm going to share that. We are looking at this conversation, though, through the eyes and the lens of Booker T. Washington, right? Because he is a player, or he's an agent in the goings on, right? At this moment in time, he's part of the plenary session. But one second, I'm gonna scroll a little bit up and then I'll share my screen. Okay, here we go. One second. This is being tricky today. Okay. Okay. All right, so this, once again, this is actually from the chapter you were going to read, right? I'll scroll back down to my page since so all of you should have this who are in the actual group, right? And I'm gonna read from what is page 16. And the significance of this is that it addresses the scope of our struggle, right? And the history, meaning that we are on a continuum, right? Even the first Pan-African Conference, although the first of its kind, the agents and actors, the individuals involved in it are continuing work that had been done by their ancestors. So what you should understand is that you, I, and all the people we're going to mention here have been constantly waging a struggle against what we know is white supremacy and culture and racism in the world for hundreds of years, ever since they had the nerve to emerge and initiate such a pathology and system. We have been engaged in constant struggle against it. And that being said, we have always come together to strategize. And this right here tells you who came together and strategized, who was constantly in struggle, working primarily on this issue for us, what they did, what their philosophy was, where they were in the world, and the various means and methods in which they do that. So that is the significance of this particular piece right here that we cover. So prior to the first Pan-African Conference, 19th and earlier 20th century Pan-Africanism in the US was espoused and practiced by individuals like Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, Martin Delany, Edward Blyden, Henry Highland Garnett, and Alexander Crummell. But as early as 1829, David Walker's appeal reflected on the history of African civilizations and made a connection between those in Africa and Africans scattered abroad. Once again, connection. His appeal not only aimed to challenge the institution of slavery, but to educate the masses on African history and culture. Pan-Africanist thought, Pan-Africanists amongst the Pan-Africanists amongst the African population in the Caribbean included the initiator of the first Pan-African Conference, Henry Sylvester Williams of Trinidad, Marcus Garvey's mentor, J. Robert Love, and Dr. J. Albert Thorne from Barbados. But decades prior to their emergence, the Haitian Revolution occurred and bolstered Pan-African consciousness in the diaspora as well. Haiti would produce Benito Sylvain and Antenor Furman, both who met Booker T. Washington in 1897 and attended the first Pan-African Conference in 1900. Out of Haiti came a wing of Pan-Africanists who created literary discourse on diasporic philosophies on Africa. The African population in Haiti produced Jean Prince Mars and Louis Joseph, who repeatedly explained that Haiti was the embodiment of the irresistible force of a united Africa. Why? Because they are African people and they still know it at that time. Pan-Africanism had a dialectical characteristic to it, which allowed historic events like the Haitian Revolution to produce a response and rise in consciousness amongst African people internationally. Similarly, in 1896, the Ethiopian victory over Italian imperialist forces in the Battle of Ottawa also bolstered the connection between diasporic Africans and those on the continent. The social climate and consciousness of the African diaspora in the Western Hemisphere and throughout the world produced two of the most prolific Pan-Africanists, W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. Each of these men had important relationships and exchanges with Booker T. Washington, who is the subject of this book. Marcus Garvey's relationship with Washington would open the door, both literally and figuratively, to the first mass organization of the African world through the Universal Negro Improvement Association. However, Washington's relationship with Du Bois would be inconsequential to the progress of Pan-Africanism. The relationship between Washington, the apparent accommodationist, and Du Bois, the Pan-Africanist scholar activist, has shaped African-American social and political history in the US for at least a century. Booker T. Washington and Du Bois and Marcus Garvey would all function differently as Pan-Africanists. The methods they employed varied, but like previous Pan-Africanists, they all had one singular objective beyond unity, which was to advance the plight of African people in the face of oppression. Okay. So if you read the complete chapter, you know from there on we move on to Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois as proponents of Pan-Africanism. And that is important because they would both impact how this concept of Pan-Africanism moves forward in the world. All right, I'm sure I'm over and I wanna, oh, okay, no, I'm not. All right, so I'm gonna wrap up in like 2 minutes here so we can have some dialogue and Q&A. That being said, we will look at Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, who is an important figure as we study this concept of Pan-Africanism and this ideology, this theory and practice of Pan-Africanism. Why is he important? He would be the sole survivor of this conference in 1900, the first Pan-African Conference. He would be one of the youngest participants, not the youngest participant in that conference in 1900. And he would not only live, but he would go on to establish and initiate something called the Pan-African Congresses. And I'm sure some of you who are on the continent and other places like, why is that important? Who cares? We should care. Why? Because the Pan-African Congresses would be continuous conferences, but called the Congresses, denoting that they were on a continuum. There would be 5 and two major historic ones, 1919 and the one in 1945, which is the Manchester Congress. The Congresses would be the think tank and the space through which African leadership would come together on the continent of Africa and not only talk about unity, but talk about continental unity. Out of the Congresses, we have the coming together of our notable continental African Pan-Africanists. Now, specifically Nkrumah, Lumumba, okay, Jomo Kenyatta, Amilcar Cabral, and others who would conceptualize, come together and have this concept of a United States of Africa or a unified Africa. Now, let me not say United States of Africa. We don't need anything modeled after the United States of America. We need something that works for African people, right? But a unified Africa, right? And Nkrumah would talk about that Ghana's independence was inconsequential if it didn't lead to the total liberation of the African continent from colonialism, right? So the Congresses that come out of the first conference, the first Pan-African Conference, 1900, Du Bois, the sole survivor, 1919, when he initiates the Congresses, he is the only one living from the first Pan-African Conference. All the other delegates and participants in the first Pan-African Conference are dead. So not only does he live, he remembers and he recalls and he has purpose. He's moving with purpose and he is committed, obviously, and organizes and is one of the major participants and organizers of the Congress, which is not for the Americas per se, but for all African people, centered, sure, held in various parts of the Western world, but centered the Congresses on working on the issues related to liberating Africa and African people. Okay, we will look at the conference resolutions of this 1919 Pan-African Congress, and we will look at the resolutions of the 1945 Manchester, which is the most significant of the Congresses, the fifth, known as the Fifth Pan-African Congress. It is out of this body, this continuous think tank and body, that you will have the emergence of the OAU, Organization of African Unity, that will eventually transform or be converted into what is presently the African Union. Now, remember, we're always talking about qualifying. Has the OAU, as it has transformed and morphed into the AU, continued and carried out its objective? Because remember, the objective of Pan-Africanism is what? To eradicate the oppression and exploitation, unity for the purpose of eradicating oppression and exploitation for African people, right? Unity for the purpose of eradicating oppression and exploitation of, not for, of African people. So we can look, you should see a straight line. First Pan-African Conference, 1900. Pan-African Congress, initiated in 1919. 5 consecutive ones all the way up to 1945. The formation of the Organization of African Unity within that body of the Congresses, within that setting, that context. And then the present day African Union. I mean, I'm sure those of you who even have a cursory knowledge knows that we have some serious work to do in influencing, looking at these bodies and actually holding them accountable, qualifying again as to whether or not they serve the interests of African people, right? Don't come together as a Congress and don't do for African people and don't do anything for us, especially the dire need of eradicating racism right? And exploitation. And yes, racism and exploitation manifests on the African continent as neo-colonialism. So I'm going to stop right there. If you didn't finish the chapter, please finish that particular chapter. We go on to start looking at the individual proponents, covering a Garvey, covering a Du Bois, covering an Nkrumah, looking at a Amilcar Cabral, looking at this dialectical relationship and starting to look at cases and scenarios that allow us to qualify behavior. And certainly, no, it's not all on the up and up, meaning that there are some scenarios where people think that Pan-Africanism is just coming together with African people, doing something on the African continent. No, that's not enough. Is this good for African people? Is this good for Black people? That's where we qualify things. We don't need a little, just a Black face on the imagery, right? We don't need that. We don't need that if it produces nothing for us, right? So we have that in the diaspora, and that's on the continent of Africa as well in terms of neo-colonialism, right? We have most infamously here in the Western world, we had Obama. I think so many of you are so intelligent. Most people know that Obama did nothing for African people, and some of us could agree that he harmed Africa in many ways in terms of his policy. And I'm not saying that lightly. I'm somebody who looked at his policies with regard to Africa during his 8-year presidency. So, melanin doesn't do anything for us if you are not an agent and an actor on behalf of African people and working in our interests. And that is when we get to qualify things. So if you haven't read, finish reading. If you haven't watched the film, go back to it. All the new material for this week coming up goes out on Monday night. And you will see that posted in WhatsApp. Now that you have, we can still dialogue. We might lag behind with the dialogue, but we'll start dialoguing, and I'm gonna see what's here in the chat real quick. Okay, who said they can? I hope you can hear me now. Okay. Oh, yes. Yes. Hi. Yes, I was. Yes. Greg Carr made a comment about this very book that we're reading from. Okay, so I don't see a whole lot of questions and comments in here. So maybe that's a good thing that what I had to say was explicit. So I'll close there. However, if you have any questions about what we read and the materials and so on and so forth, feel free, post them in the group. I will be, we'll be benchmarking now that we've got the first readings and materials digested. We can work some of them out and talk about them because they all bleed into the next set of readings, okay? I'm gonna leave it there because I don't wanna be a hoard for time. So I'm like 1 minute over. And if I don't see any questions or comments, I'm the last one of the day. So, and yes, thank you, Malicia. I saw that and you're correct. She wrote that to me directly, but yes. This book was mentioned that we're reading, that the chapter that I just referenced is from a book that was referenced by Greg Carr, who does a course, basically a global course almost, not like this, very different than this, because we are focusing, you all are organized, and that's important. But mention this particular book and this very particular issue where I talk about Pan-Africanism and the various components of Pan-Africanism. So that being said, I'm gonna wrap up. It's a pleasure. I look forward to engaging you all more as time goes on. And I want you to enjoy the readings and the materials, okay? All right, thank you very much. Bye-bye, Alicia. Thank you for your comment. All righty.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Right.
bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.